non fumeur for your own wonder. People were living on this time, we live in good. There is neither LGBT nor straight. We are all one. The captain said we're not here, but the brave, we are here.
Thank you. The lady responsible for the film is here tonight, Katherine Fairfax Wright. Come on down. That was a tough movie. Upsetting movie. Can you, before we start talking about the movie and how it got made, Katherine, can you tell people your background?
Sure. I grew up in Los Angeles. I then went to Columbia for undergraduate, double majored in film and anthropology. Although there it's more film studies, not film production, so I still didn't know a whole lot about how to actually make a movie. I just knew how to critique them. But turns out that actually was more helpful than I had expected, and allowed me to pretty much, I had done a couple internships. I had worked on a documentary in Congo about rape survivors there. I had produced a narrative feature called Gabby on the Roof in July, and a few other things. But for the most part, I had never edited. I had never shot anything more than just, a couple crappy shorts. So this was a steep learning curve. Malika, my directing partner, had never worked on a film. But she comes from journalism and has a good head on her shoulders, and I don't know, that seemed to be pretty much enough. Somehow
Did you meet at a bar? I had Malika, I called her Malika. Malika?
Either one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, either one. She's very interesting, but you shared directing, you shared just about making the movie completely?
Yeah, I shot and edited, Malika produced, and we both directed. And we both did sound recording, and we both did it, yeah. Pretty much everything was done by us except for the at the end, all the post-production and, stuff like that, coloring and things like that.
How'd you come up with why did you come up with this story? What interested you about going to Uganda to do this?
Well, it kind of started with Malika doing some journalism pieces about transgender issues in the U.S., and us just generally being concerned about human beings, equality, and things like that. Neither of us really had a long history in the LGBT activism world, though, by any stretch. But we were, hearing more and more about the situation in Uganda. We're sort of increasingly disturbed by it. But, at the same time, we had heard about this transgender man named Victor Mukasa, who had brought the Attorney General in Uganda to court after a pretty brutal police raid in his house, and he felt like his constitutional right for the freedom for constitutional right to privacy had been violated, and so he brought the Attorney General to court and ended up winning his case. And that's in a country where they have sodomy laws on the books, where there's a lot of homophobia, and so we were just interested in how those things were happening concurrently. And then, just a couple months after learning about that court case, the anti-homosexuality bill was tabled in Parliament. And so it just seemed like a really fascinating place. It sort of seemed like it was the epicenter of LGBT rights on the African continent, and we just decided to buy tickets and see what was going on.
How long did it take to make this film? And how do you raise the money? When you go to people and say, I want to talk about LGBT rights in Uganda,
Yeah.
I think most people would say, well, good luck.
Yeah, that's what happened to some extent, but we really left in quite a rush because the bill was tabled, and we felt like the story was happening before our eyes, and we were missing it, and so there was this big rush to just get over there. So we didn't wait for any money. We just used what little savings we had. I fortunately already had most of the camera gear, and we didn't bring any crew, and so it was really just the hard drives and the plane tickets. And then we came home from that first shoot and started editing the material into some selected scenes and stuff like that, and started just applying for every grant under the sun. and eventually started getting a couple. We got Chicken and Egg Pictures, based in New York, is a really wonderful organization, and they came on board. They were the first to come on board with a grant that they called the I Believe in You grant, and it was like, after 6 months of working on this film and having zero money and really not feeling sure of what would happen to it, but knowing that there was something there and that we wanted to pursue it, and it just felt really wonderful to get that. I think it was just like $10,000 or something, but it really was very meaningful. And then I think that the first money is always hardest to get, and then after that, some other grants started to flow in, and we ended up funding almost the whole thing with grants. We got a couple. We did 2 Kickstarter campaigns, but that was sort of towards the beginning of Kickstarter, and so they weren't big like they are now. Where people are raising like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was like 12,000 or something. But it also started building our fan base and stuff, because we had people that we knew had a vested interest in the film, and that was also really meaningful for us, because it showed us that people actually wanted to watch it, and we should bother to actually finish it, and things like that.
And what I've learned, Kickstarter.com, I mean, is a big place now for people making movies.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It's like one of the
Huge.
biggest film financiers, if you want to call it that, around. I mean, millions of dollars are funneling through it all the time.
So you 2 ladies, you go to Uganda. How do you get into the gay community? I mean, with all the homophobia, you would think they don't want to talk to you or be filmed.
Yes and no. Well, we had been in contact through Human Rights Watch and a couple of other organizations. We had tried to reach out to as many people as we could. At that time, David was really the most openly gay member of the community, and by default sort of the media liaison and the one most willing to speak to whoever wanted to speak to him. So we had emailed and called him before we left, and then we met up with him the first day we were in town, and he just gave us a lot of names and numbers, who had what side of the story to tell, and all this sort of thing, and everything kind of snowballed from him, or from there. And he kind of vouched for us in a way that was really important and really legitimized our project in the eyes of other members of the community. And so I think it's really important how much, the extent to which he came on board and really stood behind us. And I think sticking around is kind of what helped the most. I mean, so many journalists just come in for a couple days and get some sound bites and then leave. And we were there like every day doing every.
How long were you there?
That first trip was only a few weeks, and then we went back for like 7 weeks or something, and then we went back for an additional 7 weeks or so. But we were living with Palme and eating dinner with them every night, drinking beers with them, dancing with them, going to visit their mom and going to the hospital with them, just doing everything with them. And I think that's just sort of drove home the point that we were in it for the long run and really wanted to tell their story in their words, and not abuse their words the way that so many other journalists had done.
Awful question. Would David Cato be alive today if he didn't do this movie? Do you think
this movie.
Did you think bringing him out, did that make him more of a target than he was?
No, not at all. I mean, this movie didn't see the light of day until well after his death. And there's a really heavy media presence in general in Uganda, not just foreign journalists, but there's a pretty strong sense of freedom of the press, and it's just a pretty, the common practice is for journalists to be around, and NTV, the National News Network, to be filming everything, and so we drew some attention to ourselves because we're 2 women and we have light skin and that kind of stuff, but us following around, I mean, it wasn't like as noticeable as you might think. So I would, yeah, and he had already been outed so many times, and I mean, you see the Rolling Stones, but it had happened in many other instances.
One of the upsetting things for me in the film, and then we'll open it to questions, is the American evangelicals. Yeah. I had no idea that American evangelicals go to Africa to preach against gay people. Yeah. So how important is that, factor into what's going on in Africa?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately a pretty big factor in the whole thing. I mean, I wouldn't say it's, completely the only thing at fault. I think there's a lot of things at play, and I think there is some, there's homophobia that existed in, many decades ago, but it's definitely did not reach anywhere near the extent that it does now. The vitriol that exists now in Uganda, I think, is very much linked to the presence of American evangelicals. And that's true, I think, not just in Uganda. It's spread kind of much wider than that. And you know, some people say that they feel like they've lost the battle here, so they're trying to nip it in the bud abroad. I think that might be
President
true.
Obama recently was in Africa, and
Yeah.
New York Times reported that one of the, I think it was Senegal, the president of Senegal, told him to mind his own damn business, because President Obama said, you know,
Yeah.
you have to treat gays as human beings, and they said, mind your own business.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah, I mean,
evangelicals should mind their own damn business.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky issue also, because like one thing that's also worth noting is that the LGBT activists have really kind of backed down from this public shaming tactic, and they feel like it just instigates it brings on this reactionary response of like, oh, we're a sovereign nation, we can pass the laws that we want, who are you to tell? It's like, it almost makes it even worse. So they've really started going now much more for like closed door, you know, backdoor diplomatic efforts.
What's been the reception to the movie? Where's it been shown, and you know, how's it being perceived?
The overall reception has been resoundingly positive. It's been really wonderful. The reviews have been great. It's played at, I don't know, 120 film festivals or something, won a bunch of awards, and that's all been great, but I think it's not, it doesn't escape us that those are pretty self-selecting audiences, you know, and so we're more eager to, as we finish up with our theatrical releases and stuff, we'll be doing more and more community screenings, you know, churches bringing it to their parishioners and things like that, and that's where I think a lot of the more interesting conversations might, you know, where people who otherwise wouldn't have any interest in LGBT rights in Uganda or anywhere else, I think.
What's the situation in Uganda now? I mean, they could table the law, but the people still hate gay people.
Yeah, although I think one thing to keep in mind is that, as I said, it's not as deep-rooted as some people think it is. So I think it's important to remember that as quickly as people have come to hate LGBT people, I think they could also come to not hate them, as long as they're, you know, as soon as their pastors aren't spreading this kind of hatred. Because it's really, like, it's a highly Christian nation. I think they really take to heart, as any religious person does, the words of their pastor. So as soon as the pastors are, you know, advocating a little bit more welcome, you know, more of a welcoming attitude, I think there could be a sea change.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing in the film is that David's funeral, the first pastor, just spews hate.
Yeah.
You know, at his funeral, which is unbelievable. Do we have questions? Somebody have a question?
Hi.
The movie gal.
Hi. David's life reminds me so much of Harvey Milk. And I was wondering if he knew about Harvey Milk or any American activists that tread the way here in the United States.
Yeah.
Let me just repeat it for the people in the back.
Sure.
Basically, Kay is asking, did David know about Harvey Milk and follow in Harvey Milk's footsteps?
Yeah, he did. I kept trying to get him. I don't know if he ever saw the movie, but he definitely knew the story, and he was very well versed in the history of LGBT activism throughout the world, and he had attended a lot of trainings and workshops around the world, and was traveling frequently to the UK, and I think, yeah, he was a very sophisticated activist, and definitely knew his forebears.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. I've been following, I mean, it's not been any real secret that the right-wing evangelical whole House of Representatives and senators have been using Uganda specifically as a platform to raise money for their own re-election and everything that goes with being a politician.
Yeah.
How much legwork did you actually do in Washington, D.C.? Did you speak to any of these politicians, or how did that come into play or not come into play with what you were trying to accomplish here?
The question is, how much legwork did Katherine do in Washington to follow up on what the evangelicals are doing to raise? They're using Uganda to raise money for their own causes.
Just like they always, like
Yeah.
send out a letter, homos are at the door again.
Yeah, homos are at the door. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, a lot of that I think is being done through the family. Is that kind of where you're?
Correct.
Yeah, which there's a very fascinating book called The Family by a guy called Jeff Charlotte. But we made a very conscious decision that this was a story of the activists, and we really only wanted to take the story as far as the activism. The activists took their activism, sort of like, as much as like Giles plays the nemesis in the film, we only started filming with Giles once David brought the case to court, and so that we wanted as much of the narrative to come about organically as possible, and so we wanted, you know, the foes and stuff to be David's real foes, not just someone like, we didn't want it to be this like tit for tat, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. It's like, this is day to day what's affecting David Cato's life, not just, you know, in this macro sense. And so we just felt like that was the place of someone else, and it's fascinating. It also felt like a big mountain that it's just a whole other project trying to dig into those, to what's going on there, because it's elaborate and it's very secretive and it's definitely occurring.
And maybe a little dangerous.
Yeah.
Did you feel safe making this film when you were in Uganda?
Yeah, surprisingly so, actually. Part of it because of that sense of freedom of the press that I was talking about, and it just being normal for people to be around documenting things. I think also because you know, we weren't trying to reveal anything people were trying to keep under wraps. People feel really strongly in their position on the issue and are very happy to tell you about it, as you see from people like Giles. Also, Uganda is a pretty safe place. I mean, all things considered, you know, despite what's going on you know, with you know, members of the community and stuff, it's not like other parts of Africa where you're, you know, going to get robbed on the way to the market, or you know, going to get raped in some back alley. I mean, certainly that happens, but not to the extent that it does in other places.
What surprised you most about Uganda? You must have gone with preconceived notions.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I had never been to Uganda, but I had been.
Most people haven't.
Yeah, but I have been to like 13 other countries on the continent, so I kind of knew what I was getting into. I think kind of what surprised me most was that there was a pretty strong infrastructure, and there was, you know, access to products and access to, you know, like some sense of a transportation network, and you know, the sense of safety and the welcomingness of the nation. It was almost like, especially, I felt that the strongest when I went back after David's death. I felt like, on the one hand, I'm so in love with this country, but on the other hand, like, you've just done something so vile that I just want to like spit in everyone's face. Like, it was this really you know, this tension that was very contradictory and kind of difficult. But I think maybe what surprised me most was how much I liked it, and that also indicates how much, like, what they're fighting for. You know, these people aren't fighting just because they want to survive. Obviously, that's true, but they're not just applying for asylum left, right, and center. Like, they're fighting to keep their Ugandan lifestyle. They want to stay in Uganda. They love their country. They love their people. They just you know, want to be seen as one of them and not as some outcast.
Yes, sir.
I didn't quite catch it at the end there. What's happening with that law right now? And also, did you have a Ugandan premiere? Have you been able to show it there?
Yeah.
The question is, what's happening with the law now?
Yeah.
And did you show the film in Uganda?
The
A red carpet in Uganda.
Yeah,
Wouldn't you like that? Yeah.
The law has been retabled. It still hasn't been voted on, which is good, but it's still very much lingering. I think Museveni is a little bit more cautious about things. I don't think he necessarily cares about LGBT rights, but I think he cares about his, you know, the aid coming in. I think he cares about his reputation abroad, his country's reputation abroad, and things like that. But the parliament still seems pretty set on passing it. And there is still, you know, some sense of the general populace believing in it. But, you know, it's just there. So it could be voted on any day, or it could never be voted on. It's just yet to be determined. And we have played the film in Uganda, but under pretty controlled circumstances. We really want to leave it up to the activists themselves, how much they do or don't want to distribute the film in their own country. We definitely don't feel like that's our place. So they've all seen the film. We also, before we premiered the film in Berlin, we had it screened for the members of the community. I mean, we have everyone's releases and stuff, so legally we're not like obliged to do that, but we definitely know that circumstances can change, and we wanted to make sure that everyone who appears in the film, even for just 2 frames, was still comfortable with their presence in it. And so we had them all watch it, and we had like questionnaires, and they could anonymously or not anonymously express their concerns and stuff, and no one had any qualms with it. So, you know, that was really important to us because, you know, we want to feel like they stand behind our representation of them.
Kath, when you say it was a controlled circumstance when you showed the film,
Yeah.
does that mean it was in someone's house? Or was it in a
Actually,
movie
it was
theater?
in-
I mean,
it
was
wasn't
it?
in a movie theater, but it was in like some kind of a hall that they rented out or something. We weren't physically there.
But was it
and we left it up
secretive?
to them.
Was it secretive?
Yeah, I mean, it was, we left it up to the kind of main activists like Frank and Kasha to invite. Well, we went through, you know, who actually appeared in the film, and then beyond that, it was just kind of whoever they felt, you know, the kind of known members of the community and people who they trust.
Elizabeth?
Would you please share with us your personal story of your relationship with David and how you found out about his death and so on?
Sure.
Your personal relationship with David and how you found out about his death, etc.
Yes. One thing I'll add to that, though, is that it has played a lot in other countries in Africa. It's played in Nigeria, all over South Africa, in Kenya, in Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia. Anyway, various human rights film festivals and stuff like that. So again, it's still kind of self-selecting audiences, but it's a step in the right direction, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, David was, I think, really the person that, I think part of the not only was David just incredibly captivating as a person, you know, he was so charismatic, and you just kind of fell in love with him, and you wanted to spend time with him, and I think that's why we started filming with him, or concentrating on you know, him as the main character. But also, I think both Malik and I really felt like, in a lot of ways, he was the answer to the movement. Like, he was the person who really understood it on every level, and you know, some activists would disagree with that. They felt like he was a little bit too ruthless, and he was, you know, too impatient and things like that. But I just really personally appreciated his, like, he was the first one. If someone got arrested, he was the first one there to help them. Even if it's like 3 in the morning and they're going down to the most dangerous prison in all of Uganda or whatever, he has no money, no resources, no financing. He doesn't care. He'll like walk there if he has to. He, you know, he just was involved on every level, you know, of the issue, and just, it's all he thought about. Like, you'd be at a bar with him, and everyone else would be like dancing and having fun, and he would just be like there sitting, drinking his beer, like, you know, thinking about the future of his movement and what moves to take, and, you know, where to go next. And he was very strategic, and also really rude, and he was really like had a terrible potty mouth, but I just loved all that kind of stuff about him. So yeah, I mean, it was really devastating to, we got a text message from Naume, who we also had become very, very close with because we lived with her, and Naume and David are very close. So we got a text message from her saying that she thought David had been killed, but they didn't really have any more information than that yet, and it took like many hours to figure out what was going on because, you know, it's just kind of, everything was in such disarray, and they didn't know where the body was, and they, you know, no one has cars there and stuff, so they had to take, you know, find a way to get to where he even was. And anyway, Kasha ended up identifying him at the morgue, and so that's when we found out. But I think it was kind of strange because we didn't really have time to like grieve right then. We just had to, you know, we just of course had like our moments of just like insane tears like I haven't shed in a long time. But then we immediately were just like, you know, needing to get back on flights, and it's, you know, in the middle of a blizzard in New York, and JFK is closed, and there's all these, you know, hoops to jump through even just to get to the point where you can just like think about his death or how to carry on with your film. You know, but we just, I think the greatest sense that I remember from that period was feeling this like, this onus to share his story, you know, kind of as widely as we could, and really tell people like how awesome David was, and be able for people to learn from that. But that was almost, it sounds kind of like this really like, oh, I don't know, it was actually like a pressure, like a stress almost, like, how am I going to do this? How are we going to make this film good enough? How are we, you know, our main character can no longer participate in the film, but we're only like a third of the way, or we thought we were only like 2/3 of the way finished filming. How do we, you know, carry on with a film where he can't be in it, and these kinds of questions. And, you know, we also felt like it was such a shame that we didn't get to, there's so much footage with him that we never got to capture. Like, we were right when he died, we were in the middle of planning a 2-month shoot specifically to capture all of the intricacies of his work. You know, to go to the prisons with him, to go to the, you know, to everything that he does, to all these, you know, he would also go into like the hinterland all the time, random towns, finding, you know, he heard that a boy was abused, and so, or he heard a boy was kicked out of home, he would go and try to find their great aunt and convince her to you know, bring him back into their family and these kinds of things. And so it also felt like such a, like, you know, you're just like so mad at yourself, of like, oh, we should have stayed, we never should have left, or, you know, this kind of stuff. Anyway, that's what was going on.
Yes, sir.
Were any of the activists that you work with, or any of the people that you work with, ever prosecuted under the existing homosexuality laws? And
No.
And if not, why not? Because a lot of them were open.
Yeah.
Any answers with respect to that?
They were charged with a lot, like even, one scene that kind of got cut out, but you still see the insert shot of him holding the papers, is, David was arrested for, so he was at a bar, with 2 of his lady friends, and, some guys came up to the woman and were like, what are you doing with this, you know, gay guy, like he's just, whatever, like saying some mean stuff to him. And of course, David being the passionate man that he was, like started talking back, and they ended up kind of brawling. And anyway, the police were called, which and you know, they were arrested. So you know, that's fine, fair. You shouldn't like fight in bars or something. Except that the charge written on the paper was sodomy. So that kind of stuff happens all the time. They're charged with sodomy, but the problem is to actually prosecute sodomy, they have to catch them in the act. And so that's what's not very often. You know, it's not very often done. There's other countries, Senegal, more people are actually being arrested and like kept in jail because of it. In Uganda, it's not as common, which is why people like Bahati, you hear him say that we want to make it more, we want to broaden the term, we want to broaden our ability to arrest these people, basically. And so what they're fighting for is to have the ability to arrest them and charge them without actually catching them in the act.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, after his death, the rest of the continent, is that a springboard for maybe Nigeria or Ghana or other countries to start their activism about this? Because I know that the evangelical movement in Africa is so against homosexuality, and one word you never used in this whole film, which I've read about constantly, is they always say that homosexuality is the work of the devil, it's demonic, and so forth.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if anything materialized after his death in other countries.
The lady's asking, basically, was David's death a springboard for other countries in Africa
Yeah.
to face up to homosexuality and their laws?
Or what are you saying? The activism ratcheting up, or the?
Yeah, because you focused on Uganda.
Yeah.
But there are, you know, all the other countries,
Yeah.
Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana.
What's going on in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes both ways in that it has activism around the continent has increased. Partially, I think, because of what's happening in Uganda, also for other reasons. You know, everyone is sort of increasing their efforts and increasing their organization and the sophistication of their activism and all that kind of thing. But similarly, the you know, the other camp is ratcheting up their you know, their kind of toolkit and passion and organization also. I think that's just sort of the natural pattern of you know, these civil rights movements, and that as one side increases the ferocity of their fight, the other one does also. And that seems to be happening, you know, kind of continent-wide. There are some strides being made in other countries within the continent, but there are also a lot of countries that are unfortunately following the direction of Uganda in terms of passing bills, like Nigeria and others.
Yes, sir.
Me?
Yes.
First, kudos. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. I'm almost speechless. And on the artistic side, I think it's so chilling that the interview that you did with the managing director of Rolling Stone, and the tribute that you do to David when you present David's death. The image is so scary and so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know, you focus on Rolling Stone. Were any of those, were there other publications that were equally vicious towards towards the LGBT community?
The
Yeah.
question is Rolling Stone the only paper that's so hatred towards the gay community?
Yeah, unfortunately not. At that time, it was the one that was doing it most viciously. But that's actually an offshoot of Giles used to be at another paper called The Red Pepper. That's a similar tabloid, and they were doing a similar, kind of method of outing people. And the Rolling Stone no longer publishes, which is great. And that precedent that was kind of formed with the court victory against the Rolling Stone held up for a while, and for about maybe a year and a half or so, there weren't really any outings of that kind in the newspapers. But in recent weeks, they've started to come back, which is not good, and has, obviously strong implications for the community.
Yes, ma'am.
I love the energy of the tall, thin activist on
Feingold.
film. Can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah.
Tell us about the tall, thin activist.
Yeah,
What was his name?
strapping man called Long Jones.
Lonzo.
Yeah, he's also wonderful. He's one of our, I'd say now May Long Jones and David were the kind of three people we're closest to, especially while shooting. He's also a travel agent. I think that's kind of one of his frustrations right now, is that he can't really keep up the clientele that he otherwise would be able to because of the stigmas against him. But overall, he's great. I think he has a boyfriend now. He's pretty happy. We talk on Facebook chat pretty often. He's always on Facebook, as I don't know if you guys picked up on that, but Facebook has a very strong presence amongst the activist community there. Yeah, he's wonderful. He's kind of stepped up in his activism a little bit in recent years. He now runs a organization, or he's with an organization called Spectrum Uganda, which he is in the film too, but he's I think kind of stepped up his role in that a bit. And they are a grassroots organization that really fights for the livelihoods of people who otherwise are not so much like the activist community, but people who are a little bit kind of get lost a little bit in this scuffle and don't necessarily receive as much of the funding and things like that. But
He always cheerful.
he is super dynamic, very charismatic. People he was on the festival tour a lot with us. He did our U.S. tour, and we've been around with him a lot, and people just absolutely adore him. We were at a screening at the Castro in San Francisco together, and it was a totally sold out audience of like 1,400 people, and we walked on stage, and we were also with Bishop Sinyonjo, and we walked on stage, and the audience just like absolutely erupted in applause for the two of them, and it was like the longest standing ovation in Frameline's history. It was 8 minutes or something, and like just of continued just applause, and Long Jones kind of breaks down in tears, and it was just the most powerful moment I've experienced with this film.
So can I be his friend?
So yeah, totally, friend him.
Yes, ma'am.
Did they ever find him or?
Do they ever find the murderer?
Yeah, it is. The man who was apprehended was sentenced, and the guy you see, Enoch, a young man who David had hired to work on his land. So I think the community feels like that is probably who did it. So to some extent, I think they feel like justice was served, but the sentencing was done very quickly, without a lot of public attention, without the presence of the activist. It was just kind of like shoved through court. And he was sentenced to 30 years, but I think their frustration is that the motives really will never come to the fore. The investigation was pretty botched. They didn't really do forensic evidence. They didn't take pictures. They wiped up the blood very quickly, these kinds of things. And, whether or not he acted alone, or if he was paid, or if anything like that happened, we'll never know about it. And so I think they feel like it was kind of cast off as like a sexual escapade gone wrong, or, he was being raped or something like that. He acted in self-defense, that kind of thing. And I think, rightly so, the activist community is very frustrated by that.
Yes, back there.
Did any money change hands? Did you have to give to the cause or do anything in order to film?
Did any money change hands? Did you have to pay off the community, the LGBT community, to film it?
Yeah.
Or anybody else?
We were very hesitant to ever do that, partly because we didn't have any funding, and partly because it just, we didn't feel like it was gonna set up the kind of dynamic that we wanted. So the only times we would really pay for anything was if we were causing that person to pay for something, like if we asked David to come into town for an interview, like we would pay for his transportation, or if we asked to have a meal with him, or we were out with, for drinks with people, we would, try to buy them drinks now and again. But similar, I mean, we really became friends with them. Like, Palme was buying us beers as much as we were buying her beers, and for like weeks and weeks and weeks, she wouldn't take even a penny for us living with her, even though we were using her water, eating her food, all this kind of stuff. And so we really did very little. I mean, we paid a local guy who, this guy Moses, who's just sort of a godsend and really helpful towards us with translation and picking up hard drives and moving tapes around and going to ask judges for permission and stuff. He's not actually a member of the community, but he's an ally. So we paid him some small money. And now we pay for, we gave, the mother some money after David's death, and we pay for the kid, the niece of David, who he had been paying for her schooling, and so we've taken up her school fees, share them with Naomi since he died. So we, when Long Jones needs security money for this, that, or when he needed to move, we would give small money here and there. But really, it became much more because they're our dear friends rather than, anything else. And yeah, we were just very conscious to do it as much as it still felt like we were doing it because of that, the friendship dynamic, not because of some handout mentality, or not because of we want you to say what we want you to say, and so here's some money or anything like that. We were very conscious not to do that.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask, now that you have a lot of confidence as an accomplished filmmaker, have you put any thought to your next project?
Yeah, what's your next project? I was going to ask that. What?
I'm not really sure. This also took a lot out of me. It was really difficult for a long time, and I, haven't received a salary in 4 years, and that kind of stuff makes this seem like a hobby and not really a career. And so I'm not really sure. It's also just, super time consuming, and, I really have to be captivated by a subject in order to embark on anything like this again. So I think I'm just kind of waiting for the right thing to hit me. But in the meantime, I'm producing a narrative feature fiction film called Imperial Dreams, which will hopefully be shooting in August. We'll see. It's a gangster drama that takes place in Watts in Los Angeles. And it went through the Sundance Labs in 2011, and we've been working on the script and stuff since then, and so things are really looking good, and hopefully it'll be.
But you want to continue to be a filmmaker?
Yeah, definitely.
That's your career path. You're going to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some other things thrown in, but yeah, I definitely have no intention of abandoning filmmaking.
And you, sir, you had a question?
Well, I was just wondering, I was surprised that even with our evangelists, that the haters aren't using AIDS as a big thing like they do here.
Yeah.
And then it dawned on me, well, it's actually heterosexual over there, and so then I didn't know.
Yeah.
How does AIDS play in the hatred against homosexuals in Africa?
I think it maybe comes up more than I experienced it, but I very rarely heard it mentioned. I think part of that is just because they have such astronomical HIV rates, they couldn't possibly blame it all on LGBT people. It's just.
It sounds like you became so involved with these people's lives and involved in the community. Did you ever forget that you were making a film? I mean, do you get so close to the people that, you go out with David, you buy him drinks, and this one's buying you drinks, and you're living with these people. Does the film ever go to second base, or do you have to always say, we have to shoot this, we have to shoot this?
Yes and no. I don't know. I mean, the feeling of our friendship is getting in the way of this film never really came to the fore. I think it was more that because I came to love and respect them so much, I felt like I owed it to them. Oh, I love this part about how they do things. I have to make sure to. It almost became more of a duty because I felt like I really wanted to properly expose, their lives and be able to show it to people the way that I experienced it. And so I think it kind of drove it home even more than maybe otherwise would have.
And the most obvious question is, why does that name Kuchu come up? Is that what they call one another in
Yeah.
the gay community?
Yeah, exactly. It's somewhat like a slang term, but not an insulting one, that they've sort of chosen for themselves as a catch-all phrase for the LGBT community. The way it was explained to me was that it was just kind of randomly selected. It didn't really have any prior meaning, or it was like maybe a Kenyan word or something, or word that they had heard in Kenya. But I think the way, at least Long John's told it to me, was that it just kind of like sounded good, and so they chose it.
And why did you fall in love with Uganda? That's what I wrote down. You said you fell in love with Uganda. I didn't fall in love with Uganda through this film.
Well, yeah, because you're seeing one small slice of life there. I mean, not, the issue of homosexuality is not what's on everyone's mind at all times. And, they're really welcoming people. They have good food. They have good weather. It's very hot, but a lot of sunshine and nice tropical rains, and they have incredible soil. You plant anything, as David says, and it grows. It's called the Pearl of Africa for,
It's like Palm Springs.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to fall in
Okay,
love with it.
last question.
Are there any websites we could visit for ordinary people who might want to know more, or perhaps?
Are there any websites we can visit to find out more?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one that we've been trying, from the beginning, obviously wanted to have a perfect answer or the question, what can we do, obviously comes up a lot, and it's been actually a surprisingly difficult one to answer because there's so many different things at play, and definitely this issue of like public shaming and does international pressure really help comes into play a lot, and also funding is very complicated and gets misused, and some of the activists feel like it actually makes things worse because then people like think that they're all making money off of it and that's why they're gay and like this kind of stuff. So they almost feel like it's easier just to be broke and continue with their activism. But that said, there are things, if you go to www.palmekuchu.com/act, you'll find a list of, right now they're raising funds for, oh, that's actually one thing I forgot to mention about how it played in Uganda. They had their first ever gay pride in Uganda last year. And they played Call Me Kuchu on the opening night of that, which again was like very validating for us, and we unfortunately weren't there, but it played well, I guess, so that's great. And now they're raising money for the second one, and so that's a link that you can find on our website. Also Bishop Sinyonjo's, his efforts to work with clergy and build a gay-straight alliance and that kind of stuff. And then we also have like a fund of kind of discretionary funding, like when Long Jones calls us and says, I need to move, or this kind of stuff. It happens a lot. Or like Naume just, one other update is that Naume applied for asylum and actually lives in Sweden now. So she was granted asylum, and her kids just joined her. And so that's another thing that we just gave money for, was she needed some funds to cover the cost of bringing her kids to Uganda. And so we helped with that. And so things like that, there's like a link to if you trust us to use the money wisely. No, Long John's is pretty dedicated to staying. Yeah, a lot of them are. I mean, a lot of them have left, but also, a lot, kind of more and more are coming up through the ranks, and so there's just kind of a changing of the guards happening right now. But Long John's is still pretty dedicated to staying. I mean,
Are you going to go back to Uganda to follow up on these people? Not as a filmmaker, but as
yeah, I mean, I would love to.
Catherine?
And it's a place. I mean, it's a little sad now because David's obviously not there anymore, and now Naume's not there anymore, and so kind of two of the people we're closest to are no longer there. But it's definitely a place I, want to return to and bring my family to and stuff like that.
Thanks. One more question? Going once, going twice. We're going to thank Katherine. Well, okay, yes.
Yeah, Stosh.
The gal who shaved her head, how's she doing?
Yeah.
She had a nice shaved head. Yeah.
Yeah. Stosh, Stosh is one of the most well-spoken people I've ever met. She just like speaks in poetry, and it's, I don't know, time with her is also kind of sad. There's like this incredible, of course, I mean, she's had terrible things happen to her, but it's difficult for her, I think, because she's also one of the most, she's very well known, or, anyway, it's very difficult for her to spend time in public, and so she ends up spending a lot of time in the privacy of her home, and that means she can't really work, but she also doesn't have like that many marketable skills, but she also doesn't really want to be an activist, and she ends up getting kind of caught between things, and it's kind of a shame. She spent a lot of time in Rwanda last year, but now I think she's back in Uganda, but just kind of continuing to live. But that's kind of a bad note to end on. But one thing I would like to say is that this film is very much independent production. It's Malik and I trying to show it to the world. So, you know, as much as you can tell people about it, it's, you know, it's going to be continuing to play in, you know, theaters like this, and you know, 1 week runs here and there in different cities, and then, as I said, also community screenings, and it'll be out on Netflix and stuff on in September. And so the more you can kind of talk about it and share it and tell people to see it, really means a lot to us and means a lot to the community.
Well, no, we want to thank you for coming out here tonight. We want to thank you for the film called Me Kuchu. And Katherine Fairfax Wright, let's give her a round of applause.